As some of you may know, physics is not my primary field of education. My implications in the field of aviation has led me to develop sensors for aircraft such as these. Now you may be asking yourself, what relevance does this have? And that's a pretty good question. Maybe it's to give me a little bit of credibility, but what I do now is very similar to what I did before. What's changed is the scale. What was once a sensor the size of my fist is now a detector at 9 meters in diameter. And the metallic particles that I used to look at are now muons, about a femtometer. So today what I'll be talking to you about is the muon detector upgrades for the ALICE experiment, and also the aging studies that I've performed on these new detectors. So this will include how does the detector work, what is aging, and what's being done at TRIUMF. Now the ALICE detector is located at the Large Hadron Collider, and is an assembly of detectors, each with their specific task. Combined, it allows scientists to detect, classify, and measure various types of particles. This is why the muon detector is important, because it plays a key role in seeing muons so that scientists can use it for their analysis. Now, the ALICE detector, Canada, we're currently manufacturing, well, working on it, manufacturing the muon small, and this is one of the major upgrades for these coming years. And what I'm doing is, in the muon detector is an assembly of a bunch of chambers very similar to this prototype that I'm testing. And what I'm working on is actually determining how the detector ages in radiation, and as well as how dependent is it of flow rate through the chamber. Now before I get into aging, I want to give you a bit of background so you know how it works. So let's go through this. Now the muon detector is essentially 2 sheets of copper-plated G10. Once glued together, it forms a very thin chamber inside, where we run a gas of 55% CO2 and 45% N-pentane. Between the 2 gaps are wires suspended between the 2 gaps, and we apply 3,000 volts to these. This creates an electric field around it. As a particle pierces through the chamber, it ionizes the gas within. So now you have an electron that is attracted to the anode due to the electric field. As it accelerates, it's able to further ionize the gas around the wire. This creates an avalanche. And now we have a cluster of electrons around this wire. This amplifies our signal. When the electrons come into contact with the wire, it creates a pulse of current. This is what we use to know whether a particle has penetrated the chamber or not. So now that you have a bit of background, I can get into aging studies. So I've been gracious enough to offer you a live feed of the detector currently being aged. And you can see if anything is going to happen. It's actually a joke, it's just a Photoshop picture. But what it goes to show you is that it may as well be a video, because aging studies, nothing ever seems to happen. They take a long period of time, and the signs are very subtle. But eventually they do occur. So let's go through these signs. I'll explain them in greater detail later, but for now, I'll just list them. So the first one is Malter effects, and then we have signal strength reduction. Both of these have an underlying culprit, and why they occur, we can relate it back to the culprit. So what happens is that electrons and photons impact the molecules in the gas. These impacts are able to fragment the molecules and create little pieces. After a while, they recombine together into polymer chains. These chains then stick to different surfaces in the detector and greatly affect its performance. So once again, the culprit is polymerization. And depending on where it occurs, you get different effects. If it happens to be on the cathode, you get what they refer to as Malter effects. What happens is that the polymerized layer forms a resistive layer. When your chamber is exposed to radiation, it forms ions and electrons within the gas. The ions are no longer able to get neutralized from the cathode because of the resistive layer. So after a while, these ions build up, and you get a charge that it's great enough to actually rip an electron through the resistive layer and into your chamber. This electron is then capable of creating further ionization in the chamber. And what you get is a positive feedback, that because you have an electron now flying through the chamber creating more ionization, you get more ions, which then create another electron. So you get into the streamer mode, where you're constantly having a current. And what they refer to that is a dark current. Now normally when I would take a source and put it to the chamber, I would see that it would create a current. If I were to take it off, you would expect the current to dissipate. But with Malter effects, this current persists due to this. Now aging can also be caused by other things, such as contaminants. These contaminants can be found from outside or from inside the chamber. And they can be things such as dust or debris and harmful substances. One of the harmful substances commonly found is silicone, because it's widely used in lubricants and seals for pipe fittings, such as valves. So if you look at the picture on the left, it shows you the impact on the anode wire of silicone. What happened is that it polymerized and coated the entire wire. This now creates a resistive layer and reduces the signal strength of the detector. So now you have a much weaker signal. With all this background, I think you're now ready to get into what I'm doing here at TRIUMF. So first off, we received the detector from the Weizmann Institute in Israel. This is the prototype, similar to the actual one. Now, to accommodate this detector, we need to build a gas system to deliver the proper gas concentration to the detector. So this was done, it works great, and all is well. After that, because we're doing radiation tests, we need to build a radiation enclosure to protect the workers. So as the picture shows, we have a Lexan box. Lexan is very close to plexiglass, and in the middle, you can mount the source and adjust its height relative to the chamber. This will inherently change the rate of radiation. Now at the bottom, we have a collimator, which restricts the amount of radiation to a specific area on the chamber. Because we know the area of the collimator, we can then know how much of the length of the wire is being radiated. This will come into play later when I talk about current density. The source currently being used is strontium-90, which is a beta source. Because it's a beta source, this is why we use Lexan and not such a high density material such as lead. So a beta source has very low penetrating powers. So you just need something very simple such as plastic or Lexan. Now let's get into what's next for TRIUMF. I mentioned that we're doing aging tests with and looking at its dependency on flow rate. So we're going to do multiple tests, identical, except each time we'll change the flow rate. Each test is approximately 30 days and is equivalent to 100 years of radiation at the Large Hadron Collider. At the end, we'll look at the data and we'll draw a conclusion. We ask ourselves, did anything change? If not, then we celebrate. And if yes, we have to then figure out why and how do we fix it. Now the results to be expected, if all goes well, are the following. Current density, which is the current measured from the detector divided by the length of the wire, should be consistent during the entire 30-day test. This would indicate that there is no onset of aging. Now, the other side is that if it did occur, you would see that current density starts to decrease as the detector gets aged. This means you have polymerization and other factors coming into play. Now, the reason this is important is because at the LHC, they use a lot of CO2 and N-pentane for these chambers, so a low flow rate would benefit them cost-wise. But on the other hand, a low flow rate can also risk damaging the chamber, so you have to balance the two factors. So to summarize this, I've mentioned how the detector works, what is aging, and what's done so far at the TRIUMF. And now you get to look forward to what's coming next and the results and what the next student may produce. Thank you for your time. No.
20 seconds to spare. How about that? Now, okay, so the question is,
Yeah.
what does one do if you do see aging? Like, what are the mitigating, what can you do to mitigate the problem?
Usually,
What are the various things you can
Sure.
adjust or play
Yeah.
with or whatever.
Usually they deal with that problem in the development phase. So you're planning ahead of time, saying, I'm going to have this much radiation. I need to make sure that this product lasts this amount of time. And at that point, we'll replace it. So it's really more of a preparation than something that can be later fixed. So we're like cutting it right now.
Oh, so you're saying that there's nothing you can do to reduce it? You're just determining the lifetime of your instrument, essentially?
There are some stuff that you can do, except like changing the gas composition. But usually, like Atlas is very specific on what gases they use and what substances are in there because it's underground and you don't want highly flammable substances. So there's certain restrictions, and you could use different gases, but usually they don't like to do that. So you just plan ahead of time and say, okay, I know this detector is going to last this long, and at that point we replace it. So it's...
All right.
Would you change actually the mixture?
Pardon?
If you change the mixture of the two components,
Mhm.
that have reagent? That's possible even if it's down.
Yeah, there are tests that's been done. It's not something that I've looked into, but there are tests that has like Rob Openshot in the back has looked into that and using different, I'm not sure if it wasn't isobutane, it was another composition that they found at the 80-20 composition CO2 in this material. Aging was much less. So it is possible, I suppose, to change the composition. But it is also a harsher chemical. So
So do you know what's the expected lifetime different composition?
of the detector?
Yes.
I believe they're planning for 10 years use, right? Yeah. So.
I take it you can't ask a question?
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
wondering myself. I can ask half a question.
Why you and...
The list of people.
Yeah, okay.
So you mentioned that this is an upgrade to the Atlas detector, the new one, part of the Atlas detector.
Mhm.
What's the reason for the upgrade? Is it
Yeah, because they're going, so with these coming years, they want to go to higher energy levels and more collisions. So because of that, you're going to be getting increased radiation. So they want to make sure, they want to put newer detectors that can handle that amount of radiation and that can also be able to detect and muon in that kind of radiation. So it's really just in preparation for the next stage of Atlas that they're doing this.